Welcome, guys, to How the Frack We Got Here, a show that takes the news and events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. I'm your host, the most Will Buchanan, and on this show, we simply are all about the facts. There are plenty of news stations out there that simply want to do anything short but inform you. Here at How the Frack We Got Here, that's all we believe in. We go up to the left, we go up to the right, we go up to the middle of independence. We go after all sides because there's more than one side of a story to everything. And you need to know it all in order to actually formulate your own opinion. And that's what we try to do here at How the Frack We Got Here. Thanks for listening, and hold on. It's going to be fun.
All right, guys. Today's date, March the 15th, 2023, and this is How the Frack We Got Here. I'm your host, most Will Buchanan. How the Frack We Got Here. We do take the events of the week and try to make sense out of it all. Before we get started, guys, to let you know that even though we are a news podcast, we do try to watch our language, but at the same time, there may be things that might be shown that might be too intense for younger viewers, so viewer discretion is advised. Aside from that, welcome. So, where do we go to from here on this wonderful midweek? Well, for the simple fact of the matter, guys, Biden may be in damage control, considering that he just may have walked back one of his campaign promises.
A new oil drilling project in Alaska has the green light from the Biden administration. Climate activists fought hard to stop this initiative called the Willow Master Development Plan. It's a reversal for the White House and the president, who, as a candidate, promised to move the country away from fossil fuels. NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joins us now with more on this. So, Carol, first of all, what do we know about the scope of this project and why the administration ultimately decided to approve it? And how are some Democrats reacting to this?
Well, it's a very large project. It's a multi-billion-dollar project, Joe, and it's on the 23 acres expanse that's in Alaska's northern scope. So it's a very significant project. Now, what the White House is saying and the administration is that there was initially 5 sites that would be drilled upon, and the original proposal for this, they've cut that back to 3, denying 2 of those sites, in which the administration says will reduce the impact on the environment and endangered species that are protected. Now, they're also saying that this is something that they had little choice to do, making the case that there was potential legal challenges coming, and that the president didn't really have a choice here. And as for Democrats, you're seeing some criticism from Democrats. Environmentalists are outraged by this, saying that this is a reversal by President Biden in terms of his commitments to addressing climate change. And one Democrat, Senator Markey of Massachusetts, said that this is something that the Biden administration's decision to move forward with one of the largest oil development projects in decades sends the wrong message. So a lot of criticism here, and the administration a little bit on the defensive.
All right, Carol Lee reporting from Washington.
Yeah, pretty much. President Biden has decided that, hey, maybe Alaskan drilling's not so bad. Here's the problem. Much like his predecessor, President Obama, also said there will be no drilling in the Alaskan or protected wildlife. Biden has sat there and said it's okay to apparently go for this part of the Alaskan area called the Willow Project. Now, again, it's a, multi-billion, have you heard, multi-billion with the B project, in which that a group called ConocoPhillips that is based out of Houston is wanting to drill in the Alaskan shell near the National Petroleum Reserve. I get it to a certain extent, but it does take back what we said about the Keystone Pipeline. Again, we also said about events like Event Horizon, where spills have occurred, where the environment was forever affected, no matter how well you clean it up. At the same time, we're all scratching our heads over what exactly did the president mean by not having any choice. I mean, for this long, as vice president, he was against drilling. And even as president, for the first couple of years of his term, said he was against drilling. So again, I cannot figure out why in the world would the president basically have his hands tied over why he sit there and says he has no choice. Because again, we've seen the effects of climate change. We do know that the fact of drilling into the earth, releasing more carbon emissions, also that fracking is still continuing, even though it's really considered a dead industry, but there's still some companies that are still doing it. At the same time, it doesn't help Biden's case because the literal issue here is that we have to get off the dinosaur juice. Fossil fuels are not infinite. There is a finite number. And of course, it could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, 50 years, or even 100 years from now or more. But eventually, that fossil fuel will run to its last drop. However, people that say, well, alternative fuels, and you see these batteries that are lighting on fire and things of that nature. I mean, it's almost as if I could hear the previous I can't think of his name for saving my life. The previous John McCain. There we go. John McCain and said, when Sarah Palin, remember John McCain, Sarah Palin, drill, baby, drill, baby, drill, baby, drill. They were just a few years off. But yet it looks like they're going to get what they wanted to, even though Alaska Natives are against this, environmentalists are against this, and even some Democrats are against this. Now, of course, as president, not every decision is going to be popular, but in this case, it is hard to argue why in the world did he allow this on 3 remote areas in Alaska, especially when the fact of the matter is that we've seen what happens with pipelines. Pipelines are not secure. They are environmentally messy if something happens. And the adverse effect where it's affected is never the same. But again, still can't figure out how Biden has his hands tied in a legal matter when all he has to do is sit there and say is no, as he did in the first 2 years of his campaign. Moving right along, guys, I did want to cover the story as well because, and I know the subject of abortion is a big thing. However, the judge that you see there has told lawyers that he is involved in a major medication abortion case, which means that they are basically the ones that are deciding over whether or not women can receive emergency contraceptives via the mail, ergo the birth control pill or termination pill. But that individual there, the federal judge there, District Judge Matthew Kazmark, forgive me if I mispronounce your name, has said there and said he does not want to publicize his plans to hold a hearing in the case because why? Death threats and other harassment have been directed toward his courthouse. Now, I could sit there and go on a limb and sit there and say there's no such thing as extreme pro-choice people, but again, that possibility is always there. But history has always told us that the simple fact of the matter is that the ones who are more militant, more aggressive, if you will, the ones who sit outside Planned Parenthoods armed to the teeth are usually the I like to call them the confused pro-life folks because you're not pro-life, you're pro-birth. It's what you are. But it is amazing to me that the levels some people will go to literally and figuratively defend a point to where they will force others to submit to their will. And that's what they do with these pro-birth people. They will harass, they will shame, they will insult. And if you haven't noticed the last couple of years, got the Supreme Court to do their bidding and overturn Roe versus Wade, in which some states, especially southern states, have already introduced laws to basically ban abortion or to make it very difficult to get one, unless you are the secret lover of a Republican. Then at that point, you're just going to a nice little hush-hush place, but I digress. It is amazing to me that we keep on saying this, and I will keep on saying this as long as how the Frack got here is still running, that a woman should never have to look to a man for decisions over her own body. A woman's body is as in the words of Jay and Silent Bob, a woman's body is her own fucking business. Because you know why? The choices and consequences are ultimately hers. Either way, I still sleep at night because, again, if you put men through the same scrutiny that you put women through over this, especially, there will be riots, things would be burning at night if men had to go through what women go through. But I'm just pointing that out, that this level of abortion, as far as the subject of it, because no matter what a lot of people think, you could be pro-birth all you want, but unless you're having the child, unless your body's at risk, you really don't have a leg to stand on the situation. But they're using government funding. Planned Parenthood has never used government fundings to fund an abortion. Most abortions are actually paid out of the pocket of the woman or man or couple that's with the usually there. Planned Parenthood has never done that. But a lot of people forget that Planned Parenthood and other areas offer more than just abortion services. They actually offer preventative services, not just for men, not just for women, but for men and kids as well. But again, you have those of the extreme right, sexually and religiously repressed people who will sit there and say that they're thinking about the baby. Once the baby is born, they can care less until they're 18. And when they're 18, they can join the military because, they love the troops until they come back and don't really give them the care they need. And the VA system's a wreck. but at the same time, don't really want to talk about that. Amazing. But moving right along, guys, like I said, speaking about President Biden, aside from the decision to drill in Alaska, he has a new plan, a $6.8 trillion plan that he wants Congress to endorse. And I wish I could make this up.
Tonight in Battleground, Pennsylvania, President Biden unveiling his sweeping budget proposal, calling for major tax hikes on the wealthy and increased spending.
My budget's going to give working people a fighting chance. It's going to create good-paying jobs.
Still, with divided government, that plan is dead on arrival, with Republicans staunchly opposed to any new tax increases. But Mr. Biden's proposal likely a blueprint for his battle plan against Republicans in his expected 2024 re-election bid.
MAGA Republicans all voted to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. They voted to get rid of it over 50 times since Barack passed it.
The $6.8 trillion plan calls for protecting Social Security and shoring up Medicare by raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans, including increasing penalties on oil and gas companies, imposing a billionaire tax of 25%, and hiking the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. And it includes record spending on the military and increasing funding for social programs like early childhood education and childcare. But Republicans blasting it as a reckless tax and spend plan.
What does this budget do? Raise more taxes, spends more money, creates probably the biggest government we've ever seen in the history of the United States.
The president's plan also an attempt to revive his standing. In our latest NBC News poll, just 36% say they approve of his handling of the economy, and just 32% say they are enthusiastic or comfortable with him running for office again. As for that impending showdown over the debt ceiling, the president said he'll meet with Speaker McCarthy once Republicans release their budget.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath on that. So yes, that in itself, guys, is the actual budget itself. And that, don't get me wrong, it's not a wish list. I want to say it's a wish list. It kind of is a wish list, but it's not bad. I will be honest with you. It's not bad. The reason why I say it's not bad, because again, protecting Social Security, shoring up Medicare. You know, this is like when you can hear a lot of people go, well, see, there is something what they said about Medicare and Social Security drying up. No, it's to shore them up, which basically means to give them, basically means to make sure that, hey, our kids are taken care of. That's what it basically means. Raising taxes on the wealthiest Americans, not bad. Look, unless you've been under a rock, it is hard to admit that for the simple fact of the matter that the wealthiest out there can't afford to pay taxes. They can, no problem. Even some of them have gotten away with paying with zero in taxes in some cases. So I have nothing against raising taxes. The corporate rate being raised from 21 to 28%. Now I'm going to be honest with you, it needs to go higher. I think, like realistically, it needs to go higher. Why does it need to go higher? For the simple fact of the matter is the corporate rates, the corporate tax rate, at one point was almost 36%. And corporations complain. Even though the middle and lower class were doing great because they had tax breaks coming to them, they complained. It needs to go up higher. Just like everything else, I think that the corporations need to join the circle of woe that us Americans have to endure in this case of everything going up on our paychecks. So why not their taxes as well? Imposing a billionaire tax. Again, I'm not against that. Tax the wealthy. Because you know what it is about the wealthy when you tax them? They can still pay it. No problem. Again, I can live with that. But the thing about it is, it's just like, it needs to go farther. I mean, you are instituting a corporate tax of 28%. You're imposing a billionaire tax of 25%. You want to actually, again, hiking the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%. So already you're going after that. Now, increasing penalties on oil and gas companies. It needs to go farther. I still say you can still input a windfall profits tax. So you guys got to remember during the time when Russia was really getting involved, and of course, Russia being the number 2 producer of energy, although U.S. is still number 1, Russia's number 2, Saudi Arabia was number 3, that it was a scare. And what happened? We know what happens when in the middle of a scare of Americans. We've seen it with toilet paper. We've seen it with almost everything else. We've seen almost with your local grocery item. We've always seen it with gas. That gas will go up because, again, you need gas to run almost everything. We need gas in our cars to get to and from work and other places. Airlines need the fuel to travel. Of course, logistics also need fuel, and so forth and so forth. So again, demand is high. And those oil companies had a freaking field day. I cannot stress this enough. Those oil companies had a field day. Even more so where Biden had sat there and said, we need to introduce a windfall profits tax. Okay, do an executive order. Do an executive order to actually, because I understand what people say, an executive order or action, it's just lip service. True, but you can't sit there and say the president sit there and say, well, I want this done, even though at the time when you had Democratic majority, you could have done it, but you had some in your office that were less enthusiastic. I'm looking at you, Manchin and Sinema, mostly. But yeah, I mean, the plan itself is great. I do think there's some things that could have been a little bit more farther along, other things that could have been implemented, like removing the tax breaks that Trump put in for the wealthy corporations. They're still in place. I still think that you need to reinstitute the tax breaks for the middle and lower class that they were benefiting from, reinstituting the child tax credit back to 2008 standards, where most parents were getting at least $300 to $3,600 per kid. Because let's be honest, that's also the reason why tax time is a little bit of relief for some families, because you do get a little bit of money that you can actually use to pay some bills, catch up on things, or things of that nature. It's just that simple. But it will be a fight because, again, with the debt ceiling coming up, Biden will talk with McCarthy, but he pretty much sat there and said it, that in order for him to talk to McCarthy, the Republicans will need to submit a plan of their own. And let's be honest, we've seen the plans that Republicans have submitted. They want to cut, they would love to privatize Social Security and Medicare, because why? There's money in that. There's money in privatization, and Republicans will sit there and destroy something almost to the point to where they can take it over in order to get it. But some fact of the matter, they still want to cut programs like education. You have seen Republicans step forward and say we should be correcting these teachers, which again is another story we'll get to later. But Republicans have, and again, if you're listening to this or watching this, correct me if I'm wrong, but what is the last bit of measures or laws proposed that Republicans have submitted that have actually benefited the American people, not corporations, not rich people, benefited the middle and lower classes that Republicans have submitted, and it was widely approved? Because the last thing I can think of was expanding on the Medicare Part D prescription plan that was done under Bush 2.0. Outside of that, can't think of nothing. But hey, feel free to correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But at the same time, that's why I'm saying at this point, Republicans have nothing to offer except criticism and a little bit of hypocrite against the LGBTQ plus group, because, supposedly they're all Christians. But move right along, guys. Like I said, speaking of those that are always tackling something, Ron DeSantis, dictator governor Ron DeSantis, has yet to announce if he's running in 2024, but yet has some strong feelings about the U.S. involvement in Ukraine.
Tonight, the race for the White House, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis declaring that supporting Ukraine is not in the vital interest of the U.S., instead calling the Russian invasion a territorial dispute. The White House responding tonight, even some Republicans on the Hill with tough words for DeSantis on his foreign policy experience. Here's Rachel Scott.
Welcome to Governor DeSantis. Tonight, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is likely running for president, declared protecting Ukraine against Russia is not in the vital national interest of the U.S. DeSantis saying, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. He adds the Biden administration's virtual blank check for as long as it takes distracts from our country's most pressing challenges. The White House today firing back.
If we were just to lay back and let Putin take Ukraine, which, make no mistake, he hasn't pulled away from that. If we just lay back and let that happen, where does it stop?
The sharpest critics of DeSantis' comments, his fellow Republicans.
The last thing we need is a bully with nuclear weapons feeling like he's emboldened and that there's nobody keeping him in check.
Senator John Cornyn saying he was disturbed by the DeSantis statement. Others implying the Florida governor is out of his depth.
Obviously, he's busy running a big state, but if he's interested in the bigger states, he probably needs to get boned up on it.
Well, I don't know what he's trying to do or what the goal is. Obviously, he doesn't deal with foreign policy every day as governor.
But DeSantis is staking out a similar position as his potential top rival, former President Donald Trump, who has even suggested letting Russia take over parts of Ukraine.
Shortly after I win the presidency, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will take 24 hours.
David, former President Donald Trump has not provided any further details on how he would broker a deal to end the war in Ukraine, or specifically what parts of the country he believes Russia should be allowed to take over.
Ooh, you gotta love DeSantis. Dictator DeSantis. Just, this is how you know DeSantis is basically Trump 2.0. He's Trump 2.0 because he is pretty much saying anything and doing everything that he wants, and he has very little repercussions. He's taken on African American studies in his state and got them to blink. He's taken on the LGBTQ plus community with the Don't Say Gay bill. He's taken on Disney as far as taking away their ability to self-govern. While in the state of Florida, this man DeSantis probably feels about as untouchable as a gangster right now. But that's the problem, that DeSantis hasn't said whether or not, because I still think in 2024 he's going to run against Trump. I think right now he's testing the waters, but he is basically saying everything that he wants to say and is doing everything that he wants to do. But it is amazing to me that he's going to sit there and say, well, Ukraine's not a big issue for the U.S. right now. Again, your nationalism is showing, DeSantis, that it's not just the U.S. Initially, it was the U.S. that was involved with Ukraine, but NATO forces are involved. And yes, even myself, I was highly critical of how much we are actually spending toward Ukraine. We're sending billions of dollars in vehicles, foreign aid, and military assistance to Ukraine to assist with them going against Russia. But at the same time, but it's really more toward Biden than the actual government. Basically because Biden is okay with handing billions of dollars out to foreign aid, but yet can't seem to get over the hurdle with his own constituents. That's the problem. Do I also think that aid in Ukraine is a problem? Not at all. But at the same time, it starts to look a little funny when you're aiding a foreign country more than you're aiding the domestic constituents. That's where I have a problem with it. But another thing that I want to get to about Biden, moving on from Trump 2.0, otherwise known as Governor Dictator DeSantis, Biden has decided to move forward on gun violence, even when his own party and the Republican Party can't see eye to eye. It's an executive order, but we saw it coming.
Biden announcing new plans to curb gun violence with an executive order. For more, I want to bring in ABC News' Ike Ajachi and Peter Ambler, executive director at Giffords, a gun safety organization founded by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, and Jared Bergwan, ABC News contributor and former San Bernardino police chief. It's good to have you here with us today, gentlemen. Ike, I want to start with you. This order is aimed at moving the U.S. as close to universal background checks as possible without additional legislation. But just how much can the administration really accomplish here without congressional approval?
Well, you heard President Biden say to himself that there is only so much he can do without Congress really taking the lead on this and passing some meaningful gun reform legislation. President Biden talked about his Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that he passed last year following that tragic incident in Uvalde, Texas. And he said that now is the time for Congress to do something big. So with this executive order, the first things he does is making sure that to increase the number of background checks. He says he wants to get firearms out of the hands of dangerous individuals. So the first part of this executive order would require background checks for all firearm sales, moving the country to, as he said, as close to universal background checks as possible. President Biden was calling on a federal program that promoted red flag laws across the country. He wants to ramp up efforts to hold the gun industry accountable. You heard President Biden talking about calling for an independent government study that analyzes how these gun manufacturers actually advertise to minors. And lastly, President Biden spoke about the need to have a federal response after these tragedies. He talked about how in times of hurricanes and tornadoes, FEMA often deploys federal, state, local, and even nonprofit organizations to assist. President Biden wants the same type of federal response to take place as soon as these mass shooting incidents happen anywhere across the country. But again, this is essentially the extent of which he can do. He said it himself that he needs Congress to really ban those larger tasks that he's calling for, banning the assault weapons, banning high-capacity magazines, things of that nature, something that he talked about doing back in 1994 that really saw a decline in mass shootings related to assault weapons. He's calling on Congress to do the same thing again and hopefully get these numbers down.
Peter, I'd like your thoughts on whether or not you think this executive order is really going to move the needle when it comes to gun violence in this country, because there have been at least 110 mass shootings in the U.S. so far this year. More than 8,300 Americans have died due to gun violence so far this year. Clearly, that 2022 gun law didn't go far enough. Will this executive order help to move that along?
Thanks for having me. This executive order absolutely will move the ball forward. What this country needs desperately is an ongoing response to the epidemic of gun violence in this country. That's what President Biden is doing here today. The media's most important part of this proposal builds on the success of the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and like he said, gets us as close to universal background checks as possible. The president is really in that sweet spot today, where he's talking about policy that has been proven to be effective. States that have universal background checks are safer than states that do not. And talking about policies that have widespread bipartisan support. You talk about universal background checks, you have stratospheric levels of public approval, nearly 90% of Americans supporting universal background checks. So what the president did here today, he instructed the Attorney General to crack down on illegal gun sellers, people who are selling guns without a background check, bring those transactions out of the shadows, put them in the regulated market, increase background checks, increase public safety.
And Jared, I know you were police chief back in 2015 in San Bernardino during that mass shooting when terrorists, a husband and wife, killed 14 people. This order that the president signed today will also call for working with law enforcement to ensure that the bipartisan gun control law passed last year after those shootings in Uvalde, Texas, and Buffalo, New York, is being put to full use. What might that look like, working with law enforcement? What would your hope for that be?
You know, one of the best things that I heard out of the president's speech was the support that communities will receive after an event. I think cities and communities that are experiencing these events often find that there's an enormous amount of attention that comes in the aftermath of the event. But as the weeks and the months go on, that attention fades. And yet the people that are there and the agencies that have dealt with it, the communities, they're still living with what that tragedy did and the impact of it. We often talk about the recovery process in a community is just as important as the response to one of these events. And it's refreshing to see that there is now a lot of thought going into what that recovery looks like for communities. I think that'll be well supported by law enforcement.
Ike, I know we've been talking about how this includes increasing the use of background checks for gun purchasers, but it also is trying to promote safe firearms storage. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What might that look like?
That's right. President Biden, this is not necessarily just about getting the guns away from people who don't need them. This is also about protecting those safe gun owners, those people who have guns, and making sure that they, one, don't fall into the wrong hands, or two, fall into the hands of people who may not be able to be old enough to properly have a gun, so on and so forth. This is all part of that federal campaign, that federal push that President Biden was talking about to really get that information out there. He's tying this along with those red flag laws, the laws that allow people to really alert local law enforcement authorities when they feel someone who may not be maybe of the right state of mind or what have you, or who may cause a danger to himself or someone else. They're allowed to contact local law enforcement and see if they can help remedy that situation. The idea of promoting safer gun storage is all part of that federal program, tied along with the red flag laws that will hopefully get the information out there to teach people how to safely store their guns in their home, how to make sure that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. All of this is part of that information campaign that President Biden wants to implore to hopefully bring down those numbers and hopefully try to get a hold or get a grip on gun safety reform in this country moving forward.
Yeah, I would like to think so, but it's an executive order. And the problem with executive orders, the real problem with them, is that they don't do much. They don't. I mean, don't get me wrong, executive orders is like the president's last option. It's like, no matter what, it's almost like saying, okay, if Congress won't do something, I'm going to do something. Executive order, I need this done. An executive order is like putting in a fast food order at a very slow restaurant. It really what it is, because you can't get Democrats to agree on anything. Because Manchin single-handedly could have helped pass gun legislation. Even the gun law that Biden had signed a few months ago, and keep in mind, it's only been a few months that he signed, it was really tailored to conservatives. It didn't go far enough. It's like, but it included red flag laws. Red flag laws have to be enforced by the states. They cannot be enforced by the government. It did include extensive background checks at every sale. For a lot of people that don't know this, especially if you're in my home state of Tennessee, they do not do background checks at gun knife trade sales. They check your ID, make sure you have the cash, and that's pretty much it. And keep in mind, between personal sales, yes, you do have to report them, but how many of those are actually reported? Although the whole thing about gun laws is it's not just about more rules, more legislation, but also requirements. Again, it should be a qualification. I mean, I would treat it the same way that Japan treats theirs. Japan has a very strict gun policy. You have to basically attend a class. You have to qualify through classes. You have to go through a mental health evaluation. You have to, go through all of these steps just to be a legalized gun owner. We can do the same thing here in the U.S. Because why? Because Japan has very little deaths by guns. So does Australia. So does New Zealand. Somehow they've all figured out that, hey, if we can regulate the way firearms are done in this country, we can actually reduce the deaths by actual firearms. The U.S., again, has an ammo-sexual type of kink when it comes to guns. Now, again, I'm not trying to be a hypocrite. I'm a firearms owner myself. But at the same time, I would be all more than jumping through a few extra hoops if it means that certain individuals should not be able to get a hold of them. However, Republicans don't see it that way because they will cite the Second Amendment like it's the first verse out of the Bible, not realizing the Second Amendment only gave you the right to bear arms against a tyrannical government. And also you had to form local militias. And the last time I checked, the last time guys played Army, it was only to be in front of a Planned Parenthood or to play airsoft or paintball. Usually the guys who play airsoft paintball are a little bit more friendly than the guys staying out Planned Parenthood and want to play Army. But that's what the Second Amendment is, to bear arms against a tyrannical government. So if one day the government decided to turn up on you, you have the right to defend yourself. That's it. Somehow how it got misconstrued to like, hey, we need more gun laws. You're going to violate my right to hold a gun. No, we just want to make it harder for those that shouldn't have them. That's pretty much it. But again, it's an executive order. The Democrats could try to force it through, but again, it's unfortunately it's too late in time since the Democrats don't hold both houses anymore, and the Republican House is the House of Republicans. Yeah, let's call it what it is. It's the House of Representatives. Let's call it what it is. The House of Republicans are firmly holding there, which means that anything that a Democrat wants to push through, more than likely they will deny it just because it's Democrat. Yes, it's that petty. But again, I would be remiss not to talk about the elephant in the room, about banking, especially with Silicon Valley Bank and its collapse to where it was a government takeover. But at this point, the SEC and others are starting to investigate what really happened with this bank that at one point was considered the number 3 bank in the U.S. and is now under FDIC over control.
Well, breaking news now, the Justice Department and the Security and Exchange Commission are now investigating the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. NBC News confirmed this just moments ago, attributing 3 sources familiar with the matter. Since the bank shut down last Friday, it's been increasingly under the microscope from the Federal Reserve as well as Congress. And of course, it's got people at home nervous about what's going on. NBC News correspondent Jake Ward is following all of this. Hey, Jake, so what specifically are investigators focusing on that means this is officially happening?
Well, investigators, according to the Washington Post, both in Washington, D.C. and here in San Francisco, are looking at a combination of factors at Silicon Valley Bank, including some allegations of insider trading. According to regulatory filings, we know that the CEO, just a couple of weeks before last week's collapse, sold about $3.6 million worth of stock. And so it seems that they'll be looking closely at that. Of course, this is just a probe. We don't know if any sort of charges, any specific charges of wrongdoing are going to be alleged here. But at this point, certainly a lot of heat coming down on the leadership of Silicon Valley Bank, which is, of course, under the control of the FDIC at this hour.
Jake, we've also, of course, been talking about how the Biden administration is taking action, try to prevent these ripple effects from these bank closures. So then the next question, which is on a lot of people's minds at home, could regional banks be impacted by this? Smaller banks, less capital, is that a concern?
Yeah, it is a concern, you guys. I mean, what we're talking about here is these sort of mid-sized banks, regional banks that, once upon a time before 1985 would have just been, the sort of one bank in the one building in your small town, and have since grown to this weird size in which they are a little too small to be the kind of bank that's adequately diversified from the perspective of analysts, and also big enough to have this kind of problem that we saw with Silicon Valley Bank, where panic in one bank leads to another bank, Signature Bank being shut down. That's why, as of yesterday, Moody's announced that it was looking at 7 regional banks at possibly downgrading their credit rating. And this morning is talking about bringing down its outlook on the entire banking sector. So regional banks definitely under really serious focus today, you guys.
Yeah. Again, what I find amazing? That somewhere Senator Elizabeth Warren is going, I told you so. Because keep in mind, Elizabeth Warren had sat there and said, if you mess with the Dodd-Frank regulations that were back in 2018, which basically said that, again, for a lot of people don't know, here's a history lesson. There once was an act called the Glass-Steagall Act, which helps commercial banks, smaller banks, and basically put a wall between them. Commercial banks couldn't go to smaller banks because, again, commercial banks are greedy. They always want more money to play around with, especially to bet in Walmart, to basically bet in Wall Street, as well as to put money toward lending and borrowing in order to actually increase profits. When they took away the Glass-Steagall Act, that's actually what led to the collapse around Bush 2.0, which we called a recession. We didn't call it a depression. It was a recession, Fun little play on words there. This led to the Dodd-Frank Act, which basically is to restore some parts of Glass-Steagall to where, again, started to put walls, not as many walls as Glass-Steagall, but enough walls to the point to where commercial banks, again, couldn't go after smaller banks. Now, it's funny that this is going to be a running theme because you guys remember Norfolk Southern when I sat there and said that another reason why trains were having such an issue was because of the fact that during the Obama administration that they implemented that those brakes, that certain types of electronic pneumatic brakes had to be placed on trains carrying hazardous material, and then it was implemented, and yet those railway companies and corporations sat there and said that it would cost too much to actually put those on there and ensure safety. So they lobbied the Trump administration, who actually rolled back those policies. And lo and behold, we have a wreck somewhere. We have a wreck somewhere in East End of Pennsylvania, and that's causing an issue with the people there, which Norfolk Southern CEO is trying to apologize. Why is that relevant? Well, Trump administration also rolled back policies of the Dodd-Frank Act, which again led to some banks becoming bigger because they assumed others, as well as did very bad financial decisions that eventually led to the collapse of one Silicon Valley bank. Do you see the point where I'm trying to get at here, guys? That the simple fact of the matter is that, yes, because of that, those regulations being removed have led to disaster. Hence why Elizabeth Warren is somewhere going, I told you so. This was bound to happen. And because it was bound to happen, you guys, we all have to pay the price for it. And I can imagine some people looking at this and going, oh, hurry up and take my money out. because a lot of those companies that were under that bank did go in and take their money out. And a lot of people think, well, it's FDIC insured. Yes, up until $250,000. That's what FDIC actually does. Now, of course, the Biden administration did move forward to take over the bank to ensure that everybody's money is taken care of, because Lord knows we don't want to see a repeat of the Great Depression when Walmart, for some reason, Walmart stuck in my head, that we don't want to see the stock market on Wall Street crash to incredible low levels, which did lead to an economic downturn for a while. So we shouldn't be surprised by that. But you know what I'm surprised by? That even though Elizabeth Warren called this right, even though the Republican administration, known as the failure-in-chief Trump, rolled back these permissions, you would think Republicans would be ready to attack policies, right? Yes, they attacked Silicon Valley Bank, and the reason why it collapsed was because it was too woke. You can't make this up.
And then we see now coming out that they were one of the most woke banks in their quest for the ESG type policy and investing. This could be a trend, and there are consequences for bad Democrat policy. And I think we need to keep an eye on all the banking sector right now.
The only people who woke up were VC funds who like small government, who decided they needed government help. That was House Oversight Chairman James Comer talking about woke banks. And then there was this editorial in the Wall Street Journal today. It was written by columnist Andy Kessler, who we invited to join us on the show tonight. He declined, and explains what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. A lot of it made sense until you get to the end, where he writes, quote, in its proxy statement, SVB notes that besides 91% of their board being independent and 45% women, they also have one Black, one LGBTQ+, and 2 veterans. I'm not saying 12 white men would have avoided this mess, but the company may have been distracted by diversity demands. With us for more, my dear friend Kara Swisher, editor-at-large of New York Magazine and host of the podcast Pivot and On with Kara Swisher, and Justin Wolfers, professor of economics and public policy at the University of Michigan. Kara, refresh my memory.
Yeah.
When the actual financial crisis happened, the entire investment banking industry was led by white guys. What was under it was the festering subprime crisis, and there was not a band of LGBTQ transgender mortgage brokers selling upside down mortgages to people across this country. What kind of nonsense argument are they making here?
It's nonsense argument. It's when I saw that, I was shocked. And the same thing that Comer was saying, he's completely ignorant. Silicon Valley Bank, for a long time, it was a joke in the Valley that it was all men that were running it. A lot of women VCs wanted to get on the advisory panel, and they were locked out. They never got on it. There was nothing woke about this bank. It was very, I would say, libertarian, maybe, if you had to pick something, but not particularly political. This was about bad investments or investments they held on to. They got caught in a squeeze, essentially. And to do this is just a ridiculous, nonsensical right-wing talking point that makes no sense. This was just about finances and about what's happening in the economy and their exposure in that regard. To do this, I don't even understand it. It's just a talking point. Everything is a woke something. Woke AI, woke banks, woke pancakes next, I'm sure, something.
Yeah, but this one I really don't understand. You can make tons of these you can make tons of these anti-woke arguments, and there's a lot of people that'll try to buy into it. But this one, Justin, right? Ron DeSantis is coming off a big fundraising trip to Palm Beach. You know who lives in Palm Beach? Really rich Wall Street people who know full well that this is a garbage, nonsense argument. And trust me, none of them want to take my call today and all weekend when I'm going, you think it's because they were woke? They're avoiding my call at all costs because they know how ridiculous this is. So how does this help Republicans? I know they like the ultra MAGA crowd, but they also like rich donors.
I mean, the real problem here is that this was a bank that made really, really big bets. And sometimes when you make a bet, you lose. Why was a bank allowed to make really big bets rather than keeping some money in the vault? Because of a 2018 Trump era weakening of our financial protections. So what do you do when you're caught with your pants down? You say, hey, let's look that way. The talking point here is ridiculous and absurd. You, of course, pointed to the 2008 financial crisis, which I'm sure probably had no shortage of white men. If you want to talk about representation at Silicon Valley Bank, you might think about the representation of the CFO being ex-Lehman Brothers. That's a hiring point for you right there. Or, if you're really worried about the damage that white men do, we should go back to an earlier era where white men ran the financial sector literally from top to bottom. I think that was called the Great Depression.
Kara, let's talk about this libertarian idea.
Mm-hmm.
There was this great quote. I know you and I both laughed about it over the weekend. There are no atheists in foxholes, and there are no libertarians in a time of financial crisis. Talk to us about what we just saw go down on Twitter over the last 5 days. All sorts of libertarian types who panicked the markets, right? Really successful investors who, by the way, could have called any lawmaker, any startup company, any CEO, any bank, and voiced their opinion, given their advice. But instead, they took to Twitter. They went inside the movie theater and said, fire, 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 worsening the panic and inflaming this bank run.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think caused the bank run. That was when the VCs started calling and saying, get out of the banks. But I think what they were doing was, I call them screaming memes. They're just like, they're creating chaos, and they wanted to blame the government, and the government's not doing anything when the government was working all weekend and came up with a pretty elegant solution that is not perfect, but it's definitely not a bailout. It's exactly the kind of thing they would talk to having wanted. I think they were worried because something happened to them and they were not getting paid attention to. And it's sort of like, someone that drives a waiter crazy. Excuse me, do you know who I am? And that's.
I mean, she has a fair point. That is amazing that Republicans, even though they all had the chip in about about Silicon Valley Bank, that it's amazing when they sat there and said, well, it had to be the diversity. It had to be because it was too woke. Woke is not the buzzword that a lot of you unseasoned mayo think it is. I mean, woke is literally just understanding you're being aware of the world, even though they might not affect you the same way it affects someone else. But Silicon Valley Bank didn't go down because it was woke. Silicon Valley Bank collapsed because of a lot of terrible financial decisions. But that's the thing about banks. Banks, along with the government, along with the IRS, are probably some of the most, along with Wall Street, are some of the most widely gray areas that they can operate in. You ever wonder why banks are again? I'll go back to my student loan analogy. That a person that graduates high school at 18 years old spends months developing a business plan, showing the odds and ends, showing everything that is required to sell a financial loan manager at a bank on giving you a business loan. That person could prep, make sure that everything is right, go into that bank, shoot their presentation, and ask for a business loan and get laughed out of the building. Because they'll sit there and say, there's no way we're giving this individual $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 to start a business. No way we can do that. We can't give that to an 18-year-old. Could you imagine giving an 18-year-old $10,000 or $20,000 or more at 18 and expecting it back? That's ridiculous. That very same bank will turn around and give an 18-year-old, hey, we understand you want to go to college. College is expensive. Let's give you a $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 up student loan. Don't worry about the interest. Don't worry about the payments, because you know why? By the time you get out of college, you're gonna have a great paying job. You'll be able to pay this back, no problem. And like most college students, you buy the lie. And I hate to say it, it's a lie now. It's a nice way to turn a soft sell to an easy sell. That yes, college students sign up for it, but you're sitting there and telling me that a bank will do literally predatory practices of student loans on 18-year-old kids, but won't turn around and give that same 18-year-old $20,000 or $30,000 or even $10,000 start a business. You want to know why? Because you won't make any money off a business owner, because that business owner's First thing a business is to do is to pay back the loan, so all the money they are recouping is profit. Most banks know this. You know what banks do love? Student loans. Why? Number one, there's still no regulation on how they're done. There's no cap on the interest. And the beauty part about the whole thing is they have lobbied Congress strong enough to sit there and say, no matter what, unless you are filing a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, that you can remove student loans off your debt. That either you pay them off or they follow you to the grave. And it's messed up. And that's just the banks. Don't get me started on Wall Street and what the things they can pull. But that's the problem with these banks. They can play with our money like it's one giant set of monopoly. And even though the government have taken over Silicon Valley Bank, you guys have heard me talk about Wells Fargo. How Wells Fargo is still in operation after multiple times of catching themselves with identity theft. I am amazed because every time they're caught, they pay a fine, the CEO may resign, and they just keep trucking along. But that just goes to show you the level of power these banks truly do have. And at the same time, how Silicon Valley Bank may have other things going on, because there is a chance, and albeit it's a rumor, that the board of directors and others may have known the collapse was coming and decide to pull out. I wish I could make that up, but again, we'll follow that story as it develops. But speaking of story as it develops, guys, this is still funny to me because when it comes to Mike Pence, why are we surprised now, because he's come as a presidential candidate, that he really wants to keep talking about January 6th when he really should have done it when they asked him? You'll know what I mean in a minute.
NBC's Ali Rafa with more on former Vice President Mike Pence's pretty fiery comments about Donald Trump. So, Ali, welcome. What did he say?
Former Vice President Mike Pence not mincing words in a speech overnight, delivering his most blistering comments yet about his former boss and his role in the January 6th attack on the Capitol, saying, quote, President Trump was wrong. I had no right to overturn the election, and his reckless words endangered my family and everyone at the Capitol that day. And I know that history will hold Donald Trump accountable. His criticism coming as the former president tries to carve his way back to the White House, making his 2024 Iowa debut Monday on the heels of his likely top primary rival's first appearance in the same state. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, still not officially in the race, promoting his book in stump-style speeches Friday while taking swipes at both President Biden and his Republican predecessor. While Mr. Trump makes his pitch nearly 1,000 miles away in New York, his former attorney Michael Cohen will testify before a grand jury investigating hush money payments he made on behalf of the then 2016 candidate to former adult film star Stormy Daniels. Mr. Trump denies any wrongdoing and says he never had an affair. All of this coming as New York prosecutors signal a possible indictment soon in the ongoing probe into his business affairs, inviting him to testify before a grand jury next week. The former president hoping his legal perils don't hurt his chances politically after new polling shows a still strong but slipping hold on Iowa Republicans.
Yeah, Mike Pence saying, oh, I am not going to do that. I'm like, you could have sat there and told us when it happened. Oh, President Trump was wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. You're saying it now because it's safe. You're saying it now because it's safe and because you're running for 2024. Keep in mind, folks, this whole thing is one big old chess game. One big chess game indeed. That for the simple fact of the matter is that Pence is setting him up saying, Trump is his own man. I was his vice president. I didn't follow what he was doing. We can already see the separation. The Republican Party has already separated from Trump. 2024 is going to be a very entertaining year if Trump is not in jail by then. And on top of that, again, with given indictments, we don't know what these indictments are, that his former personal lawyer / fixer, Michael Cohen, may come out. Who knows what he's saying as far as the indictment goes. So again, if Trump somehow makes it to 2024 unscathed, I will be impressed, because in 2024, you can bet he's going to run, because when he's president, for some odd reason, he's untouchable. I mean, even when this was all coming out when he was president, the Justice Department, albeit under William Barr, first under Jeff Sessions, then under William Burr, didn't do anything. IRS, which was actually handled by Steve Mnuchin, the director of the Treasury at the time, didn't do anything. But now that he's no longer president, he's a private citizen, all gloves are off. But I'm still waiting to see what happens. I mean, because again, Trump is fighting multiple lawsuits on different levels. If you're one of his lawyers, it's Christmas time for the hours of for the billable hours you put in. But again, we'll see what happens. The last story we got before I get to our feel good segment, guys. Again, stories like this are the reason why I keep sharing them. The reason why I keep saying that justice and the justice system is broken, but really the justice system was never broken. It was working perfectly. It was never designed for us. As a man who was awarded a 400-year prison sentence is now freed because, again, they finally figured out he wasn't the one that did it.
It's the first taste of freedom in 34 years for Sidney Holmes.
I know this day was going to come sooner or later, and today is the day.
The emotional moment got the best of Sidney's mother, who in 1989 watched her then 23-year-old son be convicted for a crime he did not commit.
You got to stay humble. God is first.
Today, Sidney is 57 and finally a free man.
I can't put it into words. I don't. It's overwhelming.
Did you ever doubt today was possible?
I never doubted because I kept my faith.
Earlier in the day, Sidney shed a tear as a judge tossed out his armed robbery conviction and 400-year prison sentence.
There's no evidence tying Mr. Holmes to the robbery.
He was accused of driving two men who robbed a couple at gunpoint outside of a Fort Lauderdale convenience store. The thieves were never found, but Sidney's own persistence about his innocence led to an investigation by the Broward State Attorney's Conviction Review Unit, and they found Holmes did have an alibi and that a shaky witness misidentified him and his car.
And ultimately, all of us came to the same conclusion that this man was wrongfully convicted, that this man shouldn't have been in prison, and we needed to get him out right now.
Decades of lost time, but a chance at a fresh start without any animosity or anger.
Well, the Christian faith I have, I can't just have to keep moving.
And that's the thing, when you think about that how many more stories like that are sitting in prison right now, that a man like Mr. Holmes, who again accused of something he didn't do, was awarded a 400-year prison sentence. 400 years. I mean, obviously, no one is going to outlive that prison sentence. Nobody. But for the simple fact of the matter, it's just that level of, well, they stand and say, number one, the witness misidentified him. Number two, you didn't really find the true robbers. And again, it just goes to show you back then, these cases had so many holes in them that it just makes you wonder how literally and figuratively did the prosecution get away with this? Because for me, I would be like, if they are alive, they should be charged. Because how did you convict this person? Because it couldn't have been fair. It couldn't have been valid. But to sit there and say, I mean, the man is at peace. I hope he gets restitution for those 20 years he lost. I truly hope he does. Because how else can you sit there and really give a man back what he's lost when he did nothing wrong? That in itself needs to be looked into, and that's the reason why the Innocence Project and other similar pro-law projects like that should exist. Because no telling, if we looked at our nation system of prisons and looked each of these inmates, how many more will we find that were innocent, but yet for some odd reason justice denied them? That's all I'm saying. That's the reason why I'm for it, and we'll keep sharing them. But hey, we're going to move on to our feel-good segment, because usually on How the Frack we got here, usually we talk about doom and gloom. I mean, the stories you talk about make you doom and gloom and make you kind of lose faith in humanity a little bit. But hey, it's hump day Wednesday. Tomorrow will be Friday, which is Thursday. We will leave you guys out with some good vibrations. And this one, I believe, because I try to find something that goes beyond Black History Month. Because number one, we got the short end of the stick given the shortest month of the year. But at the same time, it's always been Black 365. And there's actually, this story is history in the making, as Star Andrews has done something that has never been done in U.S. figure skating championships. She was the first.
Black woman to medal at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships in 35 years. Star's performance was praised not only for its technical skill and artistry, but also for breaking barriers and inspiring young Black girls across the country. Star's journey to this achievement has been marked by both triumph and adversity, including her experience with a heart condition called supraventricular tachycardia and her perseverance in the face of racism and discrimination within the figure skating world. Joining us now is Star herself to discuss her experience and what this momentous achievement means for her and for the sport of figure skating. Star, so great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
And a huge congratulations to you on recently becoming the first Black woman to medal at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships in 35 years. So how did that feel in that moment? We're showing your picture right now, on your knees, hand to your head, just seemingly in disbelief.
It was an amazing experience, and I've been to a good few national championships. So this one, it just felt so special. And the first time I ever skated senior level, which is the highest level you can skate, is in San Jose. And we were back at San Jose earlier this year, and I was super excited to have medaled there, my first senior U.S. championship medal ever. So I was really excited.
Understandably. So talk to me about your journey to figure skating. How did you start and what motivated you to continue?
So I started at the young age of 3.5.
Wow.
And my mom introduced me since I could walk, very, very small. And I loved it as soon as I saw my mom skating. I was like, it looks so fun and I want to get out there too. And when she put me on those skates and got me on the ice, I just loved it. And I still love it so much to this day, just like how I was when I first learned about figure skating. And I think that, I mean, my journey has been long and I'm definitely still going through my journey, but it's all been very exciting and I just love it so much.
We can tell just right from the start you were such a natural. And early on in your career, you were diagnosed with supraventricular tachycardia, which causes your heart to beat much faster than normal. How has your experience with SVT influenced your approach to training and competition? And what steps do you take to manage your condition while skating?
I wasn't diagnosed until a year ago. The first time I ever had that experience, I was 12 years old and I went undiagnosed for a long time. The doctor told me that I was fine and that it didn't happen long enough for it to be a problem. I mean, I knew it was a problem because it wasn't a normal thing to happen to just anybody. And one time it happened at a very big competition. And unfortunately, I had to pull out of the competition. And I think from the moment, my mom was like, okay, we really need to figure out what this is. Because if it's going to affect huge competitions like this, imagine if it's at a national championships or at a world championships and it happens in your short program and you can't finish. And that would just be heartbreaking, especially because I worked so hard to get up to that point. So it was definitely something that was difficult to skate with, especially not knowing what it was for so long. But now that I know what it was and that I had the surgery, it's been so much less stressful going to competition and not having to worry about that.
I can imagine. And thinking back on your career, what advice would you give to other young Black girls who may be interested in pursuing figure skating or other sports, but just may not see people who look like them in those spaces?
I would just tell them to do what you love and believe in yourself. You can do anything you put your mind up to, and don't ever doubt yourself, because I feel like I did that for a little while and there's really no reason to. Just believe in yourself.
Good advice there. Before we let you go, what are your future goals and plans in figure skating, and what steps are you taking toward them?
My future goals are definitely to make it to the next Olympic Games. That's my number one goal. And I have little goals in between that to medal more at competitions and just to keep inspiring little girls and little boys out there who want to also ice skate or do anything that they put their mind up to.
Are you seeing some progress when it comes to minorities becoming ice skaters?
I am. There are a lot of communities and a lot of organizations that are coming together and definitely making sure that there's more diversity in ice skating, and I love it. It's something that I never saw when I was younger, so it's great to see it happening now and see it changing.
Well, you are certainly an example and an inspiration. Star, we thank you so much for joining our show tonight.
And I'm not gonna lie, I love to see when people succeed. Now, Star Andrews again, she was the first Black woman to win the gold medal at the U.S. Figure Skating Championships. Again, the first, and hopefully she will not be the last. I do like the fact that she says she would love to see more inclusion in ice skating, and I'm all for it. Inclusion in ice skating and hockey, gymnastics. There's so many guys that are good at tumbling, at somersaults, things of that nature. It's just that if we can get past that, if we can just get past that stigma, do you not understand the level of dominance that we could do in that situation? Not just ice skating, not just gymnastics, and not just the Olympics, because we've proven that in many in really many events, especially speed skating. We just had our first Black gold medalist in speed skating. Can you imagine the fact that if we get used to ice skating, it'll be a whole different program at the Winter Olympics? That's all I'm saying, among a lot of things. But that's going to do it for this podcast, guys. I do thank you all for watching, for liking, for letting me know this is live. Certainly appreciate that. Before I do get out of here, some shameless plugging. Although we don't have graphics yet, we're working on that. Shout out to my boy Vaughn at Big BZA Dot. You can definitely check him out on his Facebook page as well as his YouTube page. His YouTube page for beats. Yes, this man does make beats and sells them upon request, but definitely check him out, Big BZA Dot on all socials. As for myself, guys, you can find me BlackBox447 on all socials. I usually do reviews on everything that I watch, play, write, see, and gym stuff. Sometimes do a couple push-ups. At the same time, guys, the link that's actually trolling at the bottom, let me make that a little bit bigger for you guys to see. There you go. You can copy and paste that into your browser. We'll take you to my link tree. That's a YouTube group. That's the YouTube and Facebook groups for all of my podcasts. However, I got here, get bitten, of course, off this podcast. Like, share, and let people know about it. Also, give me your opinions. I want to know what you guys thought of everything that we covered, with things that we should be looking into. Again, I want to keep the conversation going. That's all I really want to do with this. Also, at the same time, guys, even though we are they say we're leaving a pandemic situation with the emergency maneuvers actually being taken down. However, guys, still be safe. You know, if you're going to be in areas of high traffic or you're traveling, wear a mask. If you feel sick, please stay home. The only way we're going to beat these pandemic and these numbers is because we have to act accordingly and preventatively. That's the only way we can do that. Also, at the same time, guys, again, we are all running different races. We're all on different tracks. If someone gets their goal before you do, simply congratulate them. There's no need to be salty. We need to be a more appreciative society, because at the end of the day, I just want to see everybody win, especially my chocolate and seasoned mayo folks. I want to see you win. Simple and plain. Now, the last thing I'll say about how Frack got here, it's all about staying informed. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel, guys. We are simply giving you all the information, allow you to make up your own mind, but we do provide a logical perspective that goes along with it. We do a lot better society once we're informed, but progressive, we move forward. We try to change, we try to right the wrongs of our past by making decisions now that we should have done back then. Like electing our first Black woman to the Supreme Court, electing our first Black woman to the Federal Board of Governors, electing our first Black 4-star military general, seeing our first U.S. figure skating championship won by a Black woman. All great things. When we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. That's why we keep asking ourselves, why does everything go up on our paycheck? Why do we elect different politicians, but still the same old game in Congress? And most importantly, how the Frack got here. Thank you all for watching, guys. Take care of yourselves and each other, and we'll all get through this. Peace.